Here is one of a series of talks by spiritual leader Lola McDowell Lee, spanning 2 decades from the early 70s through the 90s. Lola was a Zen Roshi, whose Rinzai lineage included Dr. Henry Platov and renowned Zen master Shigetsu Sasaki. Lola was a religious scholar as well as an ordained Christian minister. While the talks are focused mainly on Zen and Buddhism, Lola drew on many spiritual traditions, including those of Jesus, Plato, Lao Tzu, the Hindu Vedas, Meister Eckhart, and Gurdjieff.
We have been doing little things out of the Dhammapada. The path to the Dharma, it is called. And it is the instructions that the Buddha gave for lay people, as well as for the monks and the nuns. Most of the instructions that he gave were for the monks and for the nuns. And this particular one, the path to the Dharma, he gave for lay people. There's quite a bit to it. Some of it is rather repetitive. But here we come to this thing now. As the fletcher whittles and makes straight his arrows, so the master directs his straying thoughts. Don't you? Like a fish out of water, stranded on the shore, thoughts thrash and quiver, for how can they shake off desire? They tremble. They are unsteady. They wander at their will. It is good to control them, and to master them brings happiness. But how subtle they are, how elusive. The task is to quiet them, and by ruling them, to find happiness. With single-mindedness, the master quells his thoughts. He ends their wandering, and seated in the cave of the heart, he finds freedom. That's kind of nice. Huh? We should have it typed up and put it on a mirror, and so you would see it every morning and every evening, just to remind you that you are supposed to stop all this wandering around in the head. You know, that doesn't go anywhere. You're still in your head. Big place, isn't it? Howie. And, life, as we know it, and as the Buddha did say, life is a struggle. We struggle. Why do we struggle? We have many goals. That is, we have a lot of desires, lots of wants, and we get the wants and the needs mixed up. And we forget that the main goal of life, if it is to have a goal, is freedom. And this is not an economic freedom, that is, whereby you have everything that you want. Materially, it doesn't mean that. I mean, look at some of those teachers in the past who have been quite poor. Little Hotai, he was like a hobo running around with his pack on his back, and if you asked him a question, he would say, "Penny, please. Penny, please." Laugh. And it's not a political freedom, and it's not social freedom. It is simply the freedom from this ego I. It's freedom from desire. For all, the ego is desire in its way. And the moment that this ego I drops, comes down like a curtain, the curtain falls from there down to there. Instead of the curtain going up, this one, it falls down. The moment it drops, it just drops away, that moment we see what Immanuel Kant called the noumenal world, reality, the noumenal aspect of this universe. Usually we're caught up in the phenomenal aspect, but the phenomenal aspect, drops with the ego. So we have now the reality. See, what the Greeks called the nous, the knowing universe. It's a direct knowing of the universe rather than coming to us through our senses. And our sense data, our egocentricness, is a barrier between us and the reality. And because of this barrier, which completely surrounds us, we live in what we could call a confined, dark cell. Plato's version of men living in a cave, and the light filters in from over here someplace, and it creates all these shadows on the wall. And man has become identified with these shadows on the wall. And once in a while, in this world of shadows and images, somebody turns around. You turn around, and he sees light over there. And he walks over to it, and he looks, and he looks, and he looks from the mouth of this cave, and all of a sudden, he thinks, my God, what are we doing? And he steps out of the cave into this brilliant sunlight. He is free of his chains. Once in a while, it happens that there will be one of these men or women that will go back into the cave and try to tell the others. He tells them, turn around, turn around, turn around, look in the other direction, turn around. And you know what they do? They don't listen, of course. They think he's crazy. And very often they kill him. Do not disturb my world. I don't care how miserable my world is, just don't disturb me in it. Never mind this turning around. I can see right here what's on the wall. Yeah. We have done such crazy things just to protect our point of view. Because you know how we are, we think, every ego thinks it's the center of the universe. Everything revolves around me. And of course we're on this planet, and so the planet becomes the center of the universe. All the universe revolves around this earth. And again, the ego has put to death men who have said, this isn't so. So when St. Simeon says, in our incredible, incomprehensible self-deception, we think ourselves somebody, and somebody important. Yeah? That's the ego. And the minute you feel that or you think that, what about me? What about me? That isn't you at all. It's the ego. We have desires, and some of them have been with us almost as long as we've been around. As soon as the ego begins to rise, why, we keep wanting. We start wanting. And these old desires, since the year one, our year one, we keep projecting into the future where we're going to be someday rewarded. And so this present is only a little stepping stone from a miserable past to a glorious future. All is happiness and all is abundance that will surely be ours. Otherwise, we have suffered all this for nothing. We have suffered all this for the simple reason we won't look. We're so busy protecting our point of view. But now say that the ego is dropped. We try to do something about it finally, and the ego is dropped. And so the memories that we have are dropped also, and the desires are dropped also. So now what are you going to project into the future? So if there's no ego, where are you? If there's no ego, who are you? See, in that moment, and I don't care how a split second it might be, in that moment of non-ego, there is no identification. And if there's no identification, you're nobody. You're not somebody important. You're nobody. And when you are nobody, then there is this vast, tremendous silence. And your thought processes and your identification with them for that moment is non-existing. And that silence, it comes again and again. And finally, instead of being just, and there it's gone again, we come to know that it has such depth and it is such a width, immeasurable. It is all including, and it is immediate. And in its immediacy, it is immediate wholly. I mean, it instills in one what one could call holy awe, which we usually say reverence. Now, this whole world, we look out here and it's a garden. But, downtown Los Angeles, it's not very garden-like. But we include that. This whole world, no matter where you go, this whole of nature is a Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden, the garden, is of itself content. It is full of peace. It is beyond imagining this peace of this garden. And it is, they tell us in the Judeo-Christian tradition, that it is out of this garden that we fell. And it is also said that when we fell out of this garden state, we became self-conscious. And this tradition, this story, this myth, is told in various forms in all the different cultures, but all pointing to a non-ego state prior to. And it points to the state of the ego now and the succeeding non-ego state later on upon achieving, getting back into the garden, as it were, past the cherubims with the sword and the fire and all you got to do. Right. That's Genesis. The non-ego consciousness prior to, preceding this consciousness state now. And the non-ego state prior to is very different than the non-ego state that finally comes about. In some ways similar, in some ways not. In the non-ego state prior to, we were very ignorant. In the non-ego state that is to come, here we are aware. There's a difference, huh? And without an ego, then the garden is light, and it's joy, and here is this contentment, and it's unpolluted, it's uncontaminated, it's innocent. And there is in it a wonder and a reverence and a majesty and a dignity. And in the Kabbalistic system, it is called splendor. We're not very splendiferous in our ego states. We're self-conscious, and we keep ourselves as separate entities. We are islands, all well-defined. And because of that, we're confined, because definitions confine. This is the prison wall, our definitions. Now, the Buddha, he had many hundreds of disciples, monks, 1,500 or so. And one of them was called Malankya Putra. And Malankya Putra was a scholar. He was a very intellectual. He could reason. But this man became so frustrated while he was in this Buddhist Sangha because there were certain things that had not been explained to him to his satisfaction. So he went to see this Buddha, and he wanted to confront him with this problem. So he comes and he bares his shoulder and he kneels in front of him and he says, "Blessed one," the Tathagata, he's the Tathagata, he is thusly come. From whence comest thou? So they call it thusly come. And he says to him, there are theories which you have left unexplained, he says to his teacher. And they have to do with whether the world is eternal or not, whether it is finite or not, whether the soul and the body are one or different, whether a person who has attained nirvana exists after death or does not. The fact that the Blessed One has not explained these matters neither pleases me nor suits me. Too bad. If the Blessed One will not explain this to me, I will give up my spiritual discipline and return to the life of a layman. The Buddha, in his kindness, didn't say, well, pack up your gear and go. Yeah. Instead, he says, Malankya Putra, when you took to the spiritual life, did I ever promise you that I would answer these questions? No, Blessed One, you never did. Why do you think that is? Well, Blessed One, I haven't the slightest idea. I haven't the foggiest notion. Suppose, Malunkya Putra, that a man has been wounded by a poison arrow. His friends and his family are there with him, and they're about to send somebody for the doctor. Wait, he says, wait a minute now. I will not let this arrow be removed until I have learned the caste of the man who shot me. I have to know how tall he is, what family he comes from, where they live, what kind of wood his bow is made of, what Fletcher made his arrows, and when I know these things, you can proceed to take the arrow out, and then you can give me the antidote for the poison. What would you think of such a man? Well, he would be a fool, replies his disciple, and he's a little shamefaced now, all of the questions that this man is asking has nothing to do with getting the arrow out. He could die before these questions were answered. Similarly, Malunkya Putra, I do not teach whether the world is eternal or not eternal, whether it is finite or not, whether the soul and the body are the same or different, whether a person who has attained nirvana exists after death or not, or whether perhaps he both exists and does not exist, or whether he exists nor does not. I teach how to remove the arrow. The arrow is the basis of suffering. It is its origin and it is its end. So then another disciple, because there's usually several seated around, parked around him, and another disciple then pipes up and he says, these are matters perhaps which the Blessed One himself has not cared to know. Wowie. Another one, out. And to this the Buddha didn't respond immediately, but then he smiled and he grabbed up, the tree under which he was sitting. He grabbed a handful of leaves from one of the branches. And he says, what do you think? Are there more leaves in my hand or on the tree? Well, says this disciple, Blessed One, you know that your handful is only a small part of what remains on those branches. Who can count the leaves of the Shimshapa tree? What I know, this Buddha said, is like the leaves on the tree. What I teach is only a small part, but I offer it with an open hand. What do I teach? How to remove the arrow. What do I not teach? What is fascinating to discuss. That which divides people against each other, but has no bearing on putting an end to the sorrow. What do I teach? Only that it is necessary to take you to the other shore. And it comes with this koi paraga. Anyone for the other shore? Koi paraga. That's what I teach, he said. So as an archer aims his arrow, the wise aim their restless thoughts. Hard to aim, hard to restrain. And so you sit for meditation. When you sit for meditation, you do have an opportunity to look, to observe yourself. Are your thoughts directing you, or are you directing your thoughts? And that's a simple answer, huh? Who bids the mind to think? Do your thoughts go hither and thither? And then do you become lost in them? Do they make suggestions to you? Mm-hmm. Do they fascinate you? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who is the master? Yeah. Where is this master? There is a Tibetan parable. It's a little story I've told before, but it shows very well what goes on with us. There was in Tibet a man who served his master for many, many, many years. And this service was not pure. The service was given with a motivation. This attendant was motivated by something. He wanted something. He wanted some secret from this master. So he had heard that the master had a secret. And with this hidden desire, he served. But at the same time, he is serving a master, and so he's afraid to say anything really about this thing. He just hopes he's going to stumble on it someday. And at the same time, this master is continuously watching him. He's waiting for the motivation to make itself known. Of course, he knows it's there, but, it's got to spring up and come to light of its own accord. So one day, this master finally says to him, though, "It is better that you speak your mind, because I am always seeing this motive in your service. You do not serve out of love, and the service, is not necessarily for the master. It is for the master within you. So that you serve with love, and that's why you serve the master. So, but in yours I see no love and I see no humility. Your service is a kind of a bribery. So would you please just be plain, just be factual. What do you want?" Oh, and like a fish leaping to a fly out of the water, you know how they do? This man says, "I want the secret of doing miracles." Then why have you wasted my time for so long? You could have said that the very first day. You could have saved yourself a lot of misery. And me too, for that matter. It's difficult to be around those who have ulterior motives. It's ugly for them to deal with, and it's ugly for me to look at. It's just ugly. So why didn't you say something? See, the secret is so simple. Oh, it is so simple, And this is it. And he took a piece of paper and he wrote something on it. 3 little lines. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. See? And he hands the paper to this servant and says, "You take this with you everywhere. But you repeat it 5 times. Only 5 times every day. No more, no less. But the paper stays with you all the time." Very simple process. But there's one condition. While you are repeating it, you take a bath, and you close the door, and you sit silently, and you are repeating it. Please do not think of monkeys. Nasty teacher, huh? Hey. And this servant says, "What nonsense are you talking about? Why should I remember monkeys? I never think of monkeys. I'm all life I've never thought about monkeys." Well, that's up to you. If you're going to think about monkeys or not think about monkeys, it's up to you. I just tell you the conditions. Don't think about monkeys. See, you've never remembered monkeys? So far, so good. Now you go home and never come back. You have the secret, you know the conditions, fulfill the conditions, and you will have all these miracles at your fingertips. You know, all these powers. You can do what you want. You can fly in the sky, you can read people's thoughts, you can materialize things, and so on and so forth, you know, etc. And finally, I got another one. E asi susivamante. And then we come again to etc., etc., und so weiter. Right, etc. Most languages is etc. Anyway, this man, you know, he's got everything now on this piece of paper, and he rushes away. He's going to go home. He didn't even thank the master. That's how greed functions. It doesn't know thankfulness. It doesn't know gratitude. You know, it's completely unaware of gratitude. It never even stumbles over it, because greed is a thief. Thieves don't thank, they take. So, anyway, the man's rushing home, and he's already kind of puzzled. You know, he's only gone 2 blocks, and already the monkeys are appearing in his head. All kinds of monkeys. Small ones, large ones, red-mouthed ones, black-mouthed ones. And by the time he got home, he couldn't think of anything but monkeys. And they were getting larger. And they were crowding in there, more and more and more and more, bigger crowd. And he went in the bathroom and he took a bath. But the monkeys wouldn't leave him. So, and he was beginning to get a little suspicious that they were not going to leave him. He hadn't even said the prayer yet. And here are all these monkeys. He was only simply preparing. You know. And he closed the door. And the room was full of monkeys. You know. And he was so crowded in there with the monkeys, he almost didn't have any room for himself. See? So he closed his eyes, and there were monkeys. You know. He opened his eyes, and there were monkeys. He couldn't believe what was happening. All these monkeys. You know. And all night he tried. He got up and he'd take a bath, and there were too many monkeys. He couldn't repeat the prayer. He'd go back to bed. And the bed was full of monkeys. He'd get up and take a bath, get ready to say the prayer, and it was all full of monkeys. You know. So the next morning, early, he went to the master, and he returned the paper, and he said, "Keep it. It's driving me crazy. You know. I don't want to do any miracles. Just help me get rid of the monkeys." And we laugh, huh? At whom are you laughing? Try it someday. Go take a bath, close the door, and then repeat 5 times after you've had your bath. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Yeah. Hopefully no monkeys. Maybe you'll have squirrels instead. Now, a great deal of what we think, of what we call thinking, is caused by and is based on our emotions. And if you do not observe, if you do not ever observe what you think, you will never come to know that your thinking is based on your emotions. And if you can't get that far, what in the world are you going to do with yourself? And of course, this is always some more than others. I mean, there is no state we can say that's normal. That's, you know. Now and again, we may reason to a higher purpose. And again, some more than others. And we come to know that there are qualities in man what in Sanskrit are called gunas. And we have the tamasic and the rajasic and the sattvic gunas. And the tamasic are those inert, lazy qualities in us. And then the sattvic, of course, are these very fine, high-frequency qualities, gunas. And again, some more and some less. And with this sattvic guna, this fine frequency, there comes a sensitivity, and there comes a love of beauty, and there is a sensitivity for texture, see, for the taste and the flow of life that is around us, and for this silence in which we can hear the crow calling in an empty sky, or the screeching of a squirrel. There are values we give to life. Life itself doesn't hold values. We give values to life. And we call them aesthetic, these sattvic gunas. To look for beauty. Aesthetic, the aesthetic beauty of something. And there is aesthetic color. And there is music in the heart. There's a certain harmony within. This is aesthetic. We put it under this label, We can, and we do, at times, exist as a noise. And you would be surprised, if you were listening to yourself, how it rattles around and means nothing. And maybe how you are fooling yourself, when we exist as a noise. So we can exist as a noise, or we can exist as a temple in which there is this, what we could call sacred silence. To be a poet of life, to be an artist of life, it needs, an inner approach. It's not just a matter of listening to some music because it is called good, and it is called good because it's classical, and then to compare this good music to some modern music, which we say then is bad. This is silly. For instance, the Beatles songs. They played them at Carnegie Hall. They changed the tempo a little bit. And not the notes, but the way they were played. And it was hailed as genius, good classical music. And Helen Keller, blind and deaf and dumb, she would touch water and feel it. She would feel the flow of it. She would feel its coldness. She would feel its wetness. We look at water and, oh yeah, it's water. We don't feel it. She would feel the texture of a rock, and it would convey to her something. Someday when you're all alone, you close your eyes and you just hold a rock and you feel it, you touch it, and you feel as if you feel it as if you only had hands. That was your communication with it, your hands, You use the hands in place of an eye. After all, you had the hand long before you had an eye. We've just buried some of these things. We can bring them out again, too. And we have been given great gifts. We have been given the great ideas of philosophers of all the ages. The old sense of philosophy, which simply means the love of wisdom. It's missing nowadays, they say. It has become rather like religion has today, morals and ethics. There are those like Bloom and Needleman and our good friend Houston Smith and men of that caliber. They speak of our loss because to them, philosophy presents great ideas that point to a process in us, the ideas that point to a potential in us. Now, philosophy, the ideas, do not transform us. It points to, but for the transforming, we need what is called the noesis, the noetic quality. The noetic quality in us is a transforming. Philosophy points to it. Yeah. Now, Plato, and I talked about him in the beginning a little bit, but now it's gone. And speaking of aesthetics, Plato, he presents his aesthetics as the role of art and education. Art and education in the development of man. And his ideas are very difficult for most modern people to understand. They don't accept them. For Socrates says, we must carefully regulate the sort of art that is allowed in our city. See? And the hue and the cry that rises to the very heavens when people hear that. And he goes on to say the proper development of man depends on the influence of art, especially music and story. So he says then that the state, the city, the state, can allow only a specific kind of art. All others must be banned. And you know, hackles rise. This is censorship. This is offensive. Right? I know you. Right on, huh? Now, Plato, this is all comes about in his thing of the Republic. And now, he entitles this thing the Republic. And it has a secondary title. It is called The Conquest of Self. Plato is not necessarily speaking about government out there. He is speaking of you. He is speaking of this state that is ruled by a philosopher king. Have you ever read Plato with yourself in mind? That this was never projected out on any kind of government except what was in here. There is a philosopher king in here, huh? And all the other hierarchy, he says. Yeah. Who is your philosopher king? Do you have one? Are you a state without a leader? See, and the role of the guardians. These are the factors which guard this king, and they guard the people. And these guardians, he says, should not be allowed so much imitation. And when he speaks of the strength and the courage of the warriors, he is speaking of a specific inner energy that obeys and it struggles to carry out a vision of truth in us, even though we do not know it. And it is called will. It is known to the philosopher king, but the ego doesn't know it. And when he speaks of laborers and artisans and merchants, he is speaking of our desires and our appetites. And with the help of the guardians, Our desires can submit to wisdom, and they can strive for higher perception. Certainly nobody really thinks sincerely that we are beyond a censorship of art and music in ourselves. It is, after all, in dealing with ourselves and trying this conquest of self, it is very simply what he is saying: discipline yourself. And who is above discipline? Without discipline, how in the name of all that's holy are you ever going to know that which is holy? Discipline is so necessary. You train a child, that it doesn't, a child learns by imitation. Present to it what is good for it to imitate. Is what he's saying. He says, look, how many patterns of feelings that we have adopted automatically. We were young. We imitate our parents, we imitate our friends, we imitate our teachers, with the TV stars and the singers on the TV and so on, etc., etc., etc. Again, we imitate. And I think then, of the movies that I saw when I was very, very young, like 4. Perils of Pauline, Lone Chaney and the Phantom of the Opera. Yeah. And then you turn around from that, and I can remember watching, what was it? Remarks, they did a thing, Lou Ayres was in it. And they did a movie on, it was on World War I. I sobbed all the way through it. I just sobbed all the way through the thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from whom the bell tolls. Well, then it's the other one.
This is Remark. Who?
No.
No, you're thinking of Hemingway. I'm talking about Remark. Eric Remark.
No, that's
All Quiet on the Western Front. They've made a sequel to it, which I didn't see, but that first one with Lou Ayres, a little 4 or 5-year-old kid sitting watching this, and this guy reaches for a butterfly and he's shot. Oh, I couldn't stand it. Anyway, but I look at those things, and these emotions, these almost pure emotions that were aroused, the fear of that Pauline was going to get hurt, and that the fear that this Lone Chaney swinging through this opera house, And then you look at the movies today with all the rape and the pillage, and, it's a big difference of what was then and what is now. See? What emotions do they rouse, what we see today in children, 3 and 4? What do they encourage in us? Feelings. They're a tool to be used. And Bob said that last Sunday, didn't we? Yes, he did. We can use them to overcome fears. There's the old saying, the esoteric saying, you feel your way. You don't think your way, you feel your way. Thinking isn't going to accomplish it. See? Because we block ourselves from ourselves with our emotions, and we wonder what's wrong. What's wrong with me? And the art that Plato talks about, of course, is everywhere. Everywhere. We're surrounded by it. You don't have to go to a museum and look at a picture. No. Music is something we always hear. We go downtown, go to the mall, it's playing. There's music, It's in the stores, it's in the elevators, it's in the offices. You make a phone call, you're put on hold, here comes the music. Yeah? You sit on a television, on an airplane, and here comes the music. Art. And all the things we handle every day. Someone designed them all. That's art. All of this impinges on us all day long. Don't you ever wonder what thoughts and what desires are truly your own? They're all caused by all this stuff around us. Well, of course, we got sex and we got hunger. And when you're tired, you sleep. Okay, that's you. The rest of it is all impinged upon us. Art, says Plato, is an immense power in our lives, especially when we are young. And also especially when something in us is young and growing. And are you not young and growing? Yeah. Art has power. It fixes patterns of feeling. What sort of emotions are evoked and supported by the art that surrounds us? In your house, in your closets, in your cupboards, in your yards, where you work, where you go to school. A man gets up and he gets ready to go to work, he gets dressed, he goes over and he picks up a tie and he says, I'll wear this today. Why? Oh, he says, it makes me feel good. Why? What emotion has been aroused? See, a woman says, this is the blouse I'm going to wear today. Why? What value? Have you ever examined this in yourself? There is, in the traditions of India, there is the Samkhya Yoga upon which most everything, all the other traditions are based. And Samkhya Yoga goes into this in very great detail. What's going on here? Not just surface. What's going on here? And of course we know there are feelings that are less desirable than others. And we have not much good to say about hatred or self-pity or sentimentality or fear. No. But if we really begin to look at the art that surrounds us and our responses to it, which are certainly more important than the art itself, our responses to it, why we respond the way we do, then we can begin to know that art deals precisely with these emotions: fear, hatred, self-pity, sentimentality. How many dishes won't I throw away because I'm sentimental about them? Stupid. Sure. Habits. How are you going to break them unless you look? And we could experiment a little bit too, and all kinds of experiments today. When you're at the theater, look and see during the thing what kind of feelings arise. When you're watching TV, you won't be able to stick with the story long if you're watching yourself. Or we could go to a concert, and what does the music do to us? In front of any form of art, which means no matter where you turn, you look at that. You look at that. Something is responding. Some sort of emotion is coming up. And mostly, we ignore it. Totally. Totally. And you look at that, and what you're interested in immediately is yourself. We should be. There's a movie on TV, and maybe it's about some moral issue, and you may find that the emotions you have are anger or self-righteousness. I need to have revenge here now, vengeance, From whence cometh this? Many people, are surprised to find out how difficult it is to know exactly what emotions they experience in front of art. They don't know. They stand there, habitually they have covered these feelings and covered them until it's such a habit that they don't know how to get at them anymore. Just to experiment with oneself and discover some emotions about ourselves is quite enough to bring home Plato's point about the unrecognized influence in art. You know that for a long time it has been so that working with a teacher, very often a teacher will say, no, you can't read anymore. You got to get a chance to get rid of all of this stuff. Or you can read only such and such and such a book. You can't go to the movies anymore. You can't watch the television anymore. You want to get serious about this thing? Maybe not. Maybe someday we can come to a point where we begin to think about this sea of emotional influences that we swim around in. So you sit for meditation so that this philosopher king can be born, so that it rises. See, when you sit, you drop everything that does not pertain to that precise situation. And you govern yourself accordingly through the days to that precise situation, the philosopher king. Art, he says, the formative influence on the development of any given one. That's you and you and you and me. The influence. And so, we've lived a certain number of years and it has all concretized and solidified and become congealed in us. And we see that this has happened and we want to get rid of it in an instant. Lots of luck, folks. All we can do is say, just sit. And, get those thoughts, keep those thoughts from straying. Become single-minded. Then you sit, and you sit some more. And when this you see this influence and this sitting, and when they coincide, all of a sudden it penetrates through. And suddenly you meet yourself. To be so trained, and they call it thusly trained, thusly disciplined from early on, that the process and its culmination, which to Buddha would be enlightenment, in Christianity would be becoming the everlasting light, and in Zen it would be satori, the culmination. But the process would be the base, would be the foundation of education. Wouldn't that be terrific? And you know what Plato said we should study first, if this were the case? Mathematics. It's pure. You see, there's no emotions in it. It's pure. And then would come geometry, because this is now pure idea. And then would come gymnastics. And then would come music, and then would come story. And the stories then, because it comes after all of this, would no longer be lies. And of course, by this time we're 35. Yeah. But anyway, these ideas, and they are great ideas of these philosophers, of all the ages, they are ours. But, why are they so misunderstood? A really great idea is concerned with one thing, and it says, go within. It points to. Where you can take it, and because you have this noetic quality, you can transform single-mindedly, and you will be free. Yeah, that's Plato's conquest of the self, the Republic. Right? Sorry, folks. I like these things. Okay. And now, may the peace and the power that passeth all understanding hold us and keep us in the love of the Christed consciousness while we are seemingly separate one from another. And I do thank you very much.
If you find Lola's talks valuable, more will be posted in weeks to come.